Hello, everyone. Welcome to another virtual event with Mysterious Galaxy. Today, I am joined by the great Alex Segura and Rob Hart. Hello, gentlemen.
Hey, how
thanks
are
for
you?
having us.
Good. How are you both doing?
Very
Pretty good.
well.
Cool.
Wow,
Excellent.
yeah, that was effusive. Very well.
I know. You're in sync.
Good.
Yeah.
For those of you who are tuning in that don't know, maybe, hi, Chris.
Hey, Chris.
Alex Segura is an acclaimed, award-winning writer of novels, comic books, short stories, and podcasts. The last time we had him for a virtual event with us was for his Star Wars Poe Dameron, Freefall. By day, he is the Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Oni Press. Joined in conversation with him is Rob Hart, the author of the recently released The Paradox Hotel. His previous novel, The Warehouse, which is a personal fan favorite of mine, sold in more than 20 languages and was optioned for film by Ron Howard. But today we're here for Alex's latest novel, Secret Identity. And when I saw this, like, oh, that is definitely comic books right there. It is a rollicking literary mystery set in the world of comic books. For those who are tuning in either now or in the future, if you haven't yet got your copy of Secret Identity, it is definitely something you can do through Mysterious Galaxy. For those currently watching, if you click the link below, they'll take you to our webpage where you can buy either any of Alex's or Rob's books, which we have on the page, because any purchases through us just really help support doing wonderful events with wonderful authors like these two gentlemen. And both Rob and Alex are also offering signed book plates for their book purchases. So that also was a really cool benefit. If you have any questions during the event that you would like to ask Alex, you can submit them below another link that says ask a question, and those will be asked later on. I have said everything I need to for now, so I'm going to leave it to Alex and Rob for what you're here for, the meat of it. I'll see you all later.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Hey, man.
Here we are. Hey, good
What's
to see you.
going on? Yeah.
So our books are out.
Yeah, finally. Good God.
Yeah. So what? Do you want to? Paradox came out, 3 weeks before Secret Identity? We're kind of well within the month range.
Yeah, I think I was February 20th. Yeah, it was February 22nd, and your book came out March
15th. Yeah.
March 15th, which was your birthday.
Yes.
So everyone wish Alex a happy birthday.
Happy belated. Yeah.
You know, it's funny. So me and Alex, like we're collaborators and we're friends and we're always bouncing stuff off each other. So we're always in like constant contact. So it's like I feel like no, it's great. But what's interesting is that I feel like there probably aren't a lot of people who like know as much about each other's book release processes as we do.
It's been a journey. Yeah, we definitely were kind of writing parallel as we got closer to publication, and
yeah,
but it's been good. It's been good.
So,
I'd love. Do you want to just kind of give the big picture on Paradox?
Yeah, sure. You know, I mean, Paradox Hotel is it's a sci-fi mystery thriller, and it's set in a hotel for time travelers where the woman who is the head detective there is suffering from like a neurological condition that makes her slip around in time, and these people are showing up to kind of like bid for the right to like control time travel. They're privatizing time travel, and she finds a dead body and only she can see it. So she suddenly is like trying to solve this murder that she's not really sure is a murder. And it's like weird time travel stuff with like robots and dinosaurs, and you know, but also it's probably like the most earnest thing I've ever written. So it's really exciting to have it out in the world. And you know, I'm really excited to talk about Secret Identity because I mean, I read this thing pretty early on and it just knocked me out. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Secret Identity?
So Secret Identity is set in 1975 New York, and the protagonist Carmen Valdez, who's a queer Cuban American woman who moves from Miami to New York to kind of pursue her dream. She grows up reading comics. Her dad is her kind of connection to comics, so it's a strong bond, and she's always wanted to write them. So she moves to New York. She takes a job at this company called Triumph Comics, and Triumph is basically a third-rate publisher, not yet Marvel, not ever DC. And her goal there is to kind of get her foot in the door and start writing. But her boss, the editor-in-chief, basically says, look, I have a line of guys around the door that I have to keep fed. It's just not going to work. Maybe someday you'll help me run this place. And she says, that's not what I want. I want to write. and there's a standoff, and she basically feels like she's done all this work for nothing. But a colleague, this guy Harvey, a junior editor, approaches her awkwardly late one night. He just shows up at her place and says, I have this assignment. I'm going to launch the first female superhero of Triumph Comics, but I need your help because it's due really soon. And I know you want to write. The only hitch is we can't put your name on it. And Carmen's smart. She's driven, and she's not a BSer. Like, she sees the red flags, but it's her dream. And when you dangle somebody's dream right in front of them, chances are they're going to try to reach for it. So she creates this character called the Legendary Lynx with Harvey. It becomes a huge hit for Triumph, but in the interim, Harvey's murdered. And so and the scripts that were turned in were only had Harvey's name. There was no mention of Carmen, no inkling that Carmen had any role in the story. And so no one knows she's created this character, and it becomes a hit. And she has to basically try and solve Harvey's murder to not only figure out what happened to her friend, but also to reclaim this character that has so much of her heart. And while you're reading the book, you're getting snippets of the comic. So you'll see actual pages from the Legendary Lynx throughout its publication around the time, like kind of running parallel to what's happening with Carmen. So yeah, I mean, I'm excited. The reception's been good. I'm really stoked that it's out there.
The thing that really struck me right off the bat that I thought was interesting is, like, we live in like the golden age of comic book movies. It's like everything is it feels like half the movies that are in theaters right now are based on a comic book property, and like half the TV shows. And this is the first thing that I can think of, and maybe I'm wrong, that actually deals with the industry versus like an IP, like a character. I
think you're right. I mean, Cavalier and Clay, but that's such a different era. I mean, it's also like it deals with like the golden age. And this is, I think, one of the first like in the weeds like industry novels. Like, it's not about like a superhero crime novel from the perspective of the superhero. It's about the people making it. So that was fun, and creating these characters that, the one question I get all the time is like, is so and so this guy, or is Carmen supposed to be this person? And it's never one for one. Like, you take stuff and you tweak it and you make it your own. So but for Paradox, how intense was the time travel stuff for you in terms of like just plot logistics? Like, I know you have a whiteboard, so I imagine that was put to good use, like while you were mapping this out.
God, yeah. Here's the thing about writing time travel. Writing time travel is like eating at White Castle. Like, you get really excited at the prospect of doing it, and then you do it, and you're like, why have I done this to myself?
Yeah.
It's just such a nightmare. And it's funny, I guess, because like you're writing, in the past, and I was writing in the future. And so like you've got kind of like a historical record to fall back on, which is kind of cool. And then you can kind of like play with it and invent things. And when you're like trying, because time travel is not real, it's
right.
Theoretical concept. So like you kind of have to like, it's this weird mix of like wanting to be somewhat scientifically accurate, but also understanding that it's not real science, because it's all, made up anyway. But
when do you stop? Like, when do you, I know you love to research just based on our collaborations and things we've worked on together. So when do you like pump the brakes and say, okay, I know I have enough to kind of add the seasoning to this meal. I don't need to just keep going down this rabbit hole.
I mean, for me, it really, see, the thing is though, is like, I have a hard time doing that. And that's part of my process is like, so when I was writing The Warehouse, I literally got a manual on warehouse management and was like, and I read like 10 pages of it. And I'm like, what a waste of time. This isn't helping me at all. But
I love that,
like,
though. That's great.
But like we're both former journalists, so we both like really skew hard into the research phase. And like, so for me, it's very much like, I finally hit a point where I'm like so completely tapped out on like learning new stuff, and I'm just angry and I just want to write. And with Paradox, it was like I was reading a lot of quantum physics, a lot.
Wow.
I had this great book, I forget what it's called, but it's like how it was basically about how our brains perceive time, and like how time works, like from human perception. And it was massively interesting, but also like by the end of it, I'm like, I think I pulled a muscle in my head.
I think I just broke my brain. Yeah. It's funny, yeah, because when I went into Secret Identity, I knew the high concept. I think we've been talking about this since before I even did the Poe novel. Like when I was finishing the Pete books, I knew this was going to be my next crime novel. But I
Yeah.
thought I would just kind of step into it with my ingrained comic book knowledge and just write it. I figured I know enough about comics, but then so many things happened that I realized this has to feel tonally right. It can't just be like a riff on the 70s. Like I have to like look at a calendar and figure out what was happening in New York on these given days. And I have to make sure that the comic industry, like I had to check like release dates and like, can they talk about Captain Marvel? Was it even out yet? Like what was happening here? When was this convention? Like Flatiron was very patient with like a lot of reworking of the timeline because there's an actual convention in the story, and I
Yeah.
had to make sure that everything else lined up with that, like Commodore Hotel, but and then also just like getting the tone right. Like I had to interview people. Like you said we're both journalists. We used to be journalists, but I had to like conduct interviews with women that worked in comics. I had to talk to like creators that worked in comics at the time, just to get it right. Like you don't want to we know it's fiction, but you want it to have that verisimilitude.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, someone told me a long time ago, and I think this is really, really great advice, is that it doesn't have to be 100% factual. It just has to be believable,
Right.
And that was actually the question I was going to ask you. It's like, because you've been working in comics for years now. You worked at DC, you worked at Archie, now you're at Oni. So there's a degree that you can kind of go into that with an understanding of how the industry works, but it's got to be so much harder to then sort of like, because you're going back into the past, and you're dealing with the sort of like gender politics of it, which is kind of tough. Not to
Yeah.
say that the gender politics in the comic book industry are good now,
Yeah.
but they certainly weren't great back then. And so what was it fun doing some of those interviews, like reaching out to people who are kind of like old timers in the industry?
It was, yeah. I mean, we're talking about research, but it's not homework. This is stuff I do. Like it was an obsession. Like I was just like so into this idea that I wanted it to be right. And so chatting with people, like I talked to like Linda Fight, this woman who wrote this comic called The Cat for Marvel around the same time, 1970-ish. And it was the first female written female superhero #1 from Marvel ever, like credited. Um, and it was just amazing to kind of run the idea by her and kind of get her validation. Like, yeah, something like that could happen, murder aside, but like, narratively, like the idea that someone could write a character and not get credit and then have it just be gone with the wind. But I think, it was challenging because normally with our PI stuff, we would just start, I'd read some books and be into like cults or what have you, but it was just dressing on the salad. Like the series gives
Yeah.
you that base.
Yeah, I mean, like with the Ash books, I always did like a little bit of research, like the fifth book in the series, Potter's Fields, that has to do with
Mhm.
the heroin crisis on Staten Island, which is a very big thing. It's a very big issue. So I met up with a friend of a friend who, was a reformed addict, and talked to him, and then, read a book and read like a lot of articles about it, and read a book about the
Mhm.
heroin trade in the U.S. And so, yeah, like there was a little bit of research there, but yeah, like we're now getting into the weeds of like, okay, like we're going to take on these stories that are going to require like reams and reams and books, and it's I'm kind of excited because the idea that I'm working on now, that I hope will be my next book, I don't think it's going to require as much research as usual, but I think I'm just saying that to kind of like soften the blow of what it's eventually going to turn into.
I mean, I think you can start jamming on it, but I think you'll probably like what happens is sometimes we write and then we're like, I need some more structural support on this. Like, and so I have to like
Yeah.
read a book. But in terms of like the gender politics of comics or like how hard it was like writing, it was harder to write in the past because it wasn't the industry that I grew up in or the industry that I knew as like a professional. Like comics, like we were talking about, how all these shows are out there. Like we're about the same age, and so I think we both never thought we'd live in a time where there'd be a Peacemaker TV show, like who is
Oh God,
literally like
no.
a B, not even a B kid. He's like a C or D list character, and
Yeah.
or that Ant-Man would have a movie. So um, it's a new golden age for us. So I wanted to really contrast what the 70s were like when this was not even on the radar. Like they didn't think of comics as like IP or as a media play. They just thought of it as a churn. Like these kids are going to buy these comics on the newsstand. There were not really comic shops. So the industry, like the way the industry even distributed its books and sold its books was completely different.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. It's so weird to be in this age where it's like I remember watching Infinity War and being like Thanos just throat slams Spider-Man into the surface of Titan. Like this is everything I've ever wanted as a
Yeah,
child.
the
Like
comics have come to life.
how?
It's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about Paradox and the protagonist and how she came to be? And she's such a compelling character that I think both, I mean, both our characters are not in conversation with each other, but they are definitely like similar.
Yeah, January was kind of interesting because and this is where we get into like the weird sort of like divinity of the process where like I had the idea for Paradox Hotel and it was building and building and like coming together and it was like okay, like if we invented time travel, like okay, yeah, I could see it becoming like a tourism industry for the rich and I can see the government being underfunded and eventually they would have to sell it off to like the highest bidder. Like all those pieces were coming into place and then I was thinking about the concept of time travel and sort of like how hard it is to face yourself sometimes and to deal with your past actions. And, and then just like kind of one day just got this vision of this woman like walking off an elevator in like a big boho hat. And I'm like, oh, there she is. And,
Yeah.
and it was really exciting to sort of dig into this character because, we read a lot of PI fiction and, you know, a lot of PIs, and this isn't like a blanket, but a lot of PIs tend to be men, they tend to be white dudes,
Ex-cops.
yeah, and that's getting like kind of vaguely boring to me. And it was interesting. It was an interesting challenge for me as a writer to be like, oh, like what if this sort of tough talking house detective was a woman instead of a man? And what if I kind of gave myself that challenge and pushed myself there? And it was really exciting to write.
Yeah.
She was such a blast, and she because she's a jerk, and
Yeah.
me and Alex have the same agent, Josh Getzler, and I remember the first thing Josh said when he read the first couple of pages, he's like, "Please make her nicer, please."
That sounds like a Josh note.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, I mean, but it goes back to the idea of like likable characters, and I don't think your characters have to be likable. And I think she is likable despite being a jerk,
Yeah.
That's kind of her charm. And it's like what keeps you reading. And I think there's a strong like heart to the book that, you can't really sum up in the high concept. You kind of touched on it a little bit when you teed it up, but I don't know if I'm just kind of shooting blindly, but
No. I mean, like I said, it's the most earnest I've ever been writing a book. And what's kind of interesting too is that like, really for both of us, because like we were both writing queer women,
Mhm.
which is like a potential minefield, and
Yeah.
so how did you approach that in wanting to be sort of like, accurate and believable and respectful of writing like a perspective outside of your own?
Yeah, I think it's funny you said that, January just kind of showed up and appeared to you because that's really what happened with Carmen. And I never thought that would happen again because it is what happened with Pete. Like he just kind of appeared and I was like, okay, there he is. He's the PI. He's Cuban American. These are the things he has. And Carmen showed up to me in the same way. And I knew I wanted the protagonist of Secret Identity to be a woman. And then when Carmen showed up fully formed, she really connected with me because she reminded me of so many friends I had growing up in Miami, Cuban American women who, were queer and, loved comics and were, it just felt like, the perfect, it just felt like she was so three-dimensional. And I think that the big thing for me was I wanted to be thoughtful about the process and be transparent and make sure that I wasn't the only person reading this before it went out into the world, aside from my editor. Like I had sensitivity readers I had, and I spoke to friends that, had gone through that, that's their lives. Like being queer women is their lives. So it's, I hate to kind of say that's their life experience. It almost feels like you're making it trite, but
Yeah.
I just had them like give me notes and I got some great feedback. Like there's some scenes I tweaked some scenes based on feedback. I tweaked some character arcs based on feedback. And I think it made the book stronger. And, and I did a lot of reading in that space and it felt like, it's not like I'm trying to tell that definitive story either. It's not my
Oh
place
yeah.
to do that. It's a mystery at the end of the day, but I also wanted to, have that inclusion too.
Well, yeah, and that's the key. It's like you're not writing like the definitive queer experience. You're
Right.
writing, a murder mystery where the main character happens to be a queer woman.
Mhm.
And I think that's sort of like the line of demarcation here. It's like, it's sort of like with the American Dirt thing. It's like they were trying to write this book about like the definitive immigrant experience by someone who didn't have any experience as an immigrant.
Right. And when the book was I mean, I have not read the book, but when it was seemed like it was really just like a crime thriller, which is fine. It's fine to be just a genre book, and there's nothing like, it's not lesser than or other. It's a different kind of book. And how was it for you?
It was really interesting. I mean, I did have, people it went out to. I had some sensitivity readers, in large part because one of the main characters is trans. It's January's girlfriend, Mina. And, Mina plays a very big role in the story. And I went to two writers, Emma Johnson and Alina Boyden, both of whom are friends, and kind of like asked them for input. And like not so much like I wasn't looking for a pat on the head and like a good woke boy or anything, but it was like, hey, like, this is the story I just feel inspired to tell, and I just want to know what your thoughts are on it. And they both gave me such incredible input, and were so sort of like kind and open and sharing. And it's an incredible experience for me, because it's sort of forcing me to get out of my own head and into a different perspective. Because like, no matter how mindful you are of other people's experiences and understanding of that, you also have never had those experiences.
Right.
Like, I'm a white dude. Like, there's there's a lot of things that I just don't know because I've like I can see them, but I can't feel them. And so exactly. It's nice. And that's kind of the beautiful thing about being a writer, is like being able to get in other people's heads and find those like common threads of like struggle and empathy and love and caring and friendship and all that stuff.
Yeah. And I think it's good that we're in an era where that work is required. I think there was a long period of time where people just felt like, I can write whatever I want, whenever I want, and I don't have to do any kind of quote unquote homework. And I think we see a little bit of blowback now, like, well, I should be able to write whoever I want. And that right hasn't been taken away. You just kind of have to do it well and do it like thoughtfully.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. It's like people who like then receive criticism for it and get really angry. It's like, what, like this is an opportunity for growth. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, like when like I had Alina gave me some incredible notes about things that I kind of dropped the ball on in writing a trans character and a queer relationship like that. And I was so thankful because I was like, this is incredible. Like I'm learning and growing in this moment, both as a person and a writer. Like, this is fantastic. And the people who are resistant to that, like, I'm sorry for them.
I mean, notes, I love notes. I love getting feedback. I love making the book better. Like, to me, that's the fun part, when you have like this stack of pages and people are just trying to help you along. Like, nobody has to read your book. Like, that's the thing.
Oh yeah.
Like, I want to talk a little bit about genre too, because I love the journey you're on in terms of just still honoring like the crime tradition and still being in that space, but adding to it by mixing and blending genre in a way that I think is really thoughtful. And I hate to say elevates, or goes beyond genre, but I think genre is a marketing term. It's what marketing people do to shelve your book. It's not so much what authors need to do to write their books. And I think too many authors are driven by genre, or decide, well, I'm in this bucket and this is the only space I can be in. And so for you, like, what was the springboard out of the Ash books into this kind of speculative space?
I just, and I loved writing the Ash books because they were fun. They were very personal. It was a great series to write, but like, I just wanted to do something like bigger and weirder, and I wanted more toys in the sandbox, and I just kind of wanted to sort of like blow it out and expand it and see what I could do. And I mean, I love it, but it's sometimes really like nourishing creatively, because it's like, oh, cool, like, I could write a murder mystery that also has time travel. Why not? But then it just raises weird questions, because people will be like, well, what genre are you? And I'm like, I don't know at this point.
It's almost like people want to be like, what team are you on? And it's
yeah. And it's dumb. It's weird. Like, I've been like around New York City, like I've been to Barnes and Nobles where I am on sci-fi fantasy, where I am on crime and thriller, where I'm on just regular general purpose fiction. Like, even within the Barnes and Noble system, they don't have like a consistent shelving method for me. And sometimes I feel like frankly, sometimes I think it hasn't really helped me because I've got like my feet in two streams. So it's like, I think I'm not crime fiction enough for the crime fiction people anymore, and not sci-fi enough for the sci-fi people. And that might be me being like insecure and projecting, and I recognize that. But yeah, no, it's just it's a weird space to be in. But it's
Yeah,
also
I wonder if
fun.
it's because you have that ramp. I wonder if people think, well, he wrote these 5 like acclaimed crime novels. Why is he not staying in his lane? Like it might be more of that than really, because there's people that write thrillers with a speculative bent that are clearly considered like speculative authors.
Yeah. I just wanted a bigger lane.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
like it's funny because Paradox is like, murder mystery. Some people call it a locked room mystery, thriller, sci-fi. I think there's a nice element of romance there. It's like all these
Hmm.
weird different things. And so for my next book, I'm like, I'm going to do all that, and I'm going to add fantasy on top of it. I'm just going to
Oh
add
wow.
like another genre, because just who cares? Like I'm just going to keep on smashing things together until something fun happens.
If it's not fun for us, it's not going to be fun for anyone else. Like that's the thing. Like I wrote Secret Identity because it's the book I wanted to write. That I wanted to read this book. Like when I read Cavalier and Clay, like I love the book, but my big takeaway was why can't I see the comics that they're creating? Like you're in this world, you're kind of reading about these characters creating comics, and the idea stuck with me. And I love murder mysteries and I love comics, and it just felt like this book doesn't exist, so that's why we create, kind of.
Yeah. So now, right now, can we talk about the thing that you're working on next? That I know you're working on
Yeah.
next. So you're writing a sequel to Secret Identity,
Yeah.
which is super cool. When you went into, because when I got out of the Ash series and got into Warehouse, I was like, I am one and done for now on. I'm not doing any more series. I
Yeah.
can't keep it in my head. So you wrote the 5-book Pete series. When you moved into Secret Identity, were you thinking one and done, or were you open to the idea of making it a series?
It's kind of, it's funny because it's the same thing that happened with the Pete book. So obviously PI novels are much more tuned into being a series. I wrote Silent City, my first novel, thinking it would just be a one-off. Then halfway through Silent City, I was like, well, there's potential for a series. And then it just kind of went from there. So Secret Identity, I was pretty sure going in it was going to be a standalone because it just felt like it was so singular. But then as I got to writing it, I really loved the world and the characters, and by the time I got to the end of it, I realized there's another side to this coin. There's a modern day story about commodification of art and IP, or a murder mystery surrounding IP, and just in the modern vein, and fandom and things that I wanted to still talk about that were not even really present in Secret Identity. So the next book's going to follow a new protagonist, this cartoonist who once wanted to work in superhero comics as an artist, but for whatever reason couldn't get through, but has found like great acclaim and success, like doing New Yorker cartoons, or like memoir graphic novels and things like that. And there's an announcement that this sorry, there's like a giant truck. There's an announcement that this company has been reborn, Triumph Entertainment, and they're relaunching this obscure character from the 70s called the Legendary Lynx, a character that this protagonist has been a huge fan of since she was a kid. And then there's this social media groundswell to get her on this book. So she decides, well, I'm going to write my next memoir graphic novel about this experience, about this, like me writing my dream superhero character and achieving the dream of superhero comics. And so as she's doing it, she starts getting these mysterious pings, like anonymous messages from someone basically saying there's more to this than you think. Like there's some dirt in this character that you need to dig up, because it's going to really hit you at your core once you figure out what's going on. And then there's some direct ties to what happens at the end of Secret Identity that I don't want to give away, but Carmen does show up and some other characters show up. But it's pretty much about like, what's it like with ideas now? Like, how does it work? Like, and a lot of comics is, how can we take this comic book and make it into something else? And it's not as much about like, let's make a great comic, as it's just, it's interesting. It's very different from the 70s.
Yeah. So that's cool that you're kind of like, focused in on this, but I also know that like, we tend to work in like sort of similar styles. So I'm sure you have like, at least 10 other ideas in the back burner.
Yeah.
So outside of like the Secret Identity universe that you're creating, would you ever want to get into sort of like different genres and you know, kind of play around with like adding stuff to the sandbox? Or
Yeah, I mean, can we even talk about this thing that we're working on? Are we allowed to talk about it?
I mean, yeah, we definitely can, because I don't
Okay.
care. This is our event.
Yeah,
You know,
I mean,
and the question was slightly more for like you as an author personally, like a solo thing.
yeah, I mean, I love tinkering with genre. I love sci-fi. I love fantasy. I love true crime. I mean, I mean, mysteries are what got me in the door. So I'll always have like some element of a mystery in whatever I do. But I don't feel like I'm just locked into always writing crime novels. And that's not me like kind of looking down at crime novels. It's just like I'm a pretty flexible reader, so I'll probably be that way as a writer. And I think you're the same.
Yeah. And yeah, so and we're working on something that would we're working on like basically a space novel now, which is
Yeah,
super
sci-fi,
fun.
spy thriller in the vein of you know a spy who came in from the cold meets Star Trek, basically.
Yeah, yeah, which is super fun and is currently on
Yeah,
submission. So
fingers
and I got
crossed.
my fingers crossed on that. Yeah. But that's the thing that's really fun. Like I love our sort of collaborative process. Because you're such an easy collaborator. Good God, like
Likewise, yeah.
some writers are such divas, and we're both divas in our own way. But and I think this
Yeah, we
really
got. I
stems
mean, I'm sure
from,
I can get. We can get persnickety with stuff, but that's also like
yeah.
we're journalists, and it's like I'm not as precious about the word as I think some authors are. Like if someone has a note and it makes it better, fine. Like
And yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. It's like both being former journalists, like we come from an environment where it's like, you know, the story wins. Or like, you know, you might
right.
file a story and then the thing's changed on the night shift and then you come in and it's a completely different story. It's like, okay, moving on,
Yeah.
you know.
It's your byline though. I mean, it's your name as a reporter. So unless it's something like
Yeah.
egregiously bad, like it's probably they changed it for the better and you look good.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's yeah, that it's fun to kind of play in that space where like now it's doing like more traditional sci-fi of like, oh man, I got to figure out how I remember like I was on Google one night and literally was like searching for like what is that front part of a spaceship that you fly it from is called. And I'm like,
I mean, I
maybe I
had such
just
a
shouldn't be
blast.
writing sci-fi.
Yeah. I mean, I had such a blast writing the Poe book. And, even with doing one Star Wars novel, that doesn't mean you're not guaranteed like more. So it was like,
Yeah.
I like playing in the space. I like writing sci-fi. And I went through this period where I was reading a lot of John le Carre again and revisiting some of the Smiley novels. And I was like, there's something here. And I think that's when I reached out to you. I was like, would you even want to play in this box? Like, I think it could be like, not to say franchise, but it could be like a series. It could be like this,
Yeah.
a very different kind of sci-fi series.
And you know, just like and there's so many ways to like spin it out, and so many cool weird little stories you can tell like in this sort of world. And
Totally.
yeah, it was like just the world building portion of it was like really fun. I was like literally like drawing like maps of the solar system on the board behind me and like trying to figure out like, you know, because the and we'll just say like the general concept is like we sort of like destroy the planet and start like colonizing the rest of the solar system, and then it's like, you know, kind of figuring out like who's got their space stations where and like what the politics look like. And then like when you turn geopolitics into space politics, it's
Yeah.
like,
And
oh
it's also
man.
very character driven. Like it's two viewpoints. Each character is very different, and one's on the ship and one's on the base, and it's kind of like I think I don't want to spoil too much, but it was a blast to write. It's been a blast to work on, and hopefully we can find a home for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've
So
got a bunch of
should,
questions. Yeah.
yeah, we should start taking some of those.
Also,
Okay.
that giant green button below us is where you can kind of access the books and pick up a copy. They have signed book plates. So
Oh, I like
let me
this
see.
first question for you.
Okay.
Was it hard for you to not pour any or all comic book industry grievances into this book?
Was it hard or not? I tried to evoke common problems that exist in comics, like the idea of improper credit or creators creating characters and not owning them is like comics is littered with stuff like that. I mean, like the story of Bill Finger, the guy who co-created Batman, but didn't receive credit until a few years ago because Bob Kane, the co-creator, managed to sign the contract with DC and kind of boxed him out. And the poor guy, like, just lived in anonymity. Like, people knew him as a comic writer, but nobody said, okay, this guy co-created Batman, or, you know, the people that had influence on the creation of Wonder Woman. I mean, it's all over. So I definitely wanted to show that, you know, this was not some uncommon like lightning strike. This was not unrealistic that this could have happened. But in terms of grievances, you know, I'm pretty laid back. Like, I try not to hold grudges, so I didn't. I didn't like.
That's surprising to hear, because I know you as a very angry and vengeful person.
Yeah, so it was. I wanted to just make it feel like it could have happened. That was like my big nerd thing, like trying to make sure that everything could line up. And so if you like squint closely enough, you could think, okay, maybe I will find like a Legendary Lynx comic in a long box in the back of a comic shop.
Yeah. All right. So, what was the most interesting piece of information you came across while researching for this book or any of your books?
I think what I found. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, I can tell you what mine is that when I was trying to figure out, like, because I, you know, again, I was looking at time travel as like parallel to space travel now, where like all these like rich guys are like, you know, trying to get into space.
Right.
And I was like, but why? Like, tourism can't be it. You know, there's got to be more money to be made there. And it turns out like there's a ton of money to be made in space, because, you know, not just from like, you know, access and control of communication networks to, you know, the average meteor that approaches the Earth contains like trillions of dollars in precious metals. And there's actually a lot of information about how if we can move sort of shipping and manufacturing to zero-G environments, it would be like really, really, you know, cost effective and really good. So it was like, oh, wow. Yeah, that's why Bezos is so interested in getting into space, you know. So that was fun and slightly creepy.
I kind of geeked out over distribution, which sounds really silly, but I think a lot of comics hinges on how it's distributed. Like, the success and failure of comics over the years depends on who's putting it out there and where it is and how are people able to access it. So like 1975, the newsstand was the main funnel to get comics out, but the newsstand is a very flawed distribution system because you have to overprint by tens of thousands. So you have to print like 60,000 to sell 15,000, which is not a successful business model. And there was no secondary market, which is to say people weren't collecting them. Like, some people were, but a very small minority, but like the majority of comic fans weren't collecting them. Like, they would buy them, they'd buy Spider-Man, read it, toss it. And there was also no promise that when you went back, the next issue of Spider-Man would be at the newsstand the next month. Like, it was pretty chaotic and pretty Wild West. So I think I read a lot about that. I read a lot about comic shop retailers later, which it kind of shows you in parallel why the industry pivoted that way, because it made comics collectible. It made comics more continuous in their story. And that opened the door to stuff like movies and TV shows and merchandise, because there's just more to play with there. You have these great origins, and then you have a big era where it's a lot of one-off issues. And then in the 70s, because there was no real structure or editorial oversight, these guys were doing pretty bonkers stuff, because there was not it's not the same. Whereas today, like, an editor will tell you, well, we can't do that to, you know, our character because we have a movie deal with so and so, and we can't have them have affected that way. Whereas back then there was no sense of media, so you could have kind of crazy stories, which is a lot. It's never going to really happen that way again because corporations don't act that way,
unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right. Did you always want Secret Identity to be a mystery noir, or did that change down the line?
I always knew it was going to be a crime novel, a murder mystery in comics, and I definitely wanted to lean harder into the noir than. I mean, I think my Pete novels are pretty noir, but they're also hard-boiled and they're PI novels, so you kind of have to address the tropes of that genre. But for me, I wanted this to feel much more like a film noir. Like, you could be watching it and get, you know, like Double Indemnity vibes or like Patricia Highsmith vibes from it.
Okay, which kind of answers the next question. What noir stories did you draw inspiration from? Although if there's any more you want to throw out, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think I took a page out of Megan Abbott's playbook. I think one thing she does really, I mean, aside from being a fantastic writer and her prose is to die for, one of the things she does well is she takes those noir elements and she transports them into other worlds that you wouldn't really think are noir, like gymnastics or cheerleading or science or, things like that. And I thought, well, no one's really done that with comics, and it just feels like it's ripe for that. So yeah, the Megan, Patricia Highsmith, Margaret Millar. Um, yeah, those are the big ones that come to mind.
Okay. So, okay, Rob's book has elements about going back in time, and Alex's book is set in the past. Where would each of you travel back to given the opportunity? Okay, good question.
Huh.
I mean, I'm already queued up on this one since I've been
What's yours?
answering this question.
Oh, I'm curious.
I would love to see any Shakespeare play on opening night. And my original answer, which I thought would make me sound clever, would be like, oh, I want to go back to the Library of Alexandria because like see what kind of knowledge I might have missed out on. And then I probably would have gotten there and be like, damn it, I don't read Greek. And it would have been a waste of time.
You'd be stuck there.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is probably very basic, but I would love to have been on that rooftop when the Beatles did their last concert in 1960.
That's a good answer. Okay.
Just to see them, like at the end, but also in their prime. And like, I'm a huge Beatles nut, so it would have just been, I mean, I'm talking about it like it was a missed opportunity, but that would be cool.
See, actually, my music answer would be I would love to see Johnny Cash in concert.
Oh yeah, not to be in Folsom, but to be at the Folsom show.
Yeah, like maybe standing on the other side of the fence watching it. But like, yeah, like that he's the one musician who like I just wish I could have seen live before he died.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Both of you coming from a journalism background, has that helped or hindered researching for your books? That's interesting. What do you think about that?
I think it's helped. I mean, it's just I think we've gotten, I don't want to speak for you, but I think we've gotten to the point where we also know when enough is enough and when we have enough style and texture and info to really make the book sing. Like that's when I usually start pumping the brakes. Like I'll keep reading stuff like while writing, but because I try not to read fiction while writing my stuff. But yeah, I think it's helped, especially the stuff I learned as a journalist, like how to kind of boil down information. That was a huge help.
Yeah, and I think the thing that we really get out of that too is just access to information, in a way that I think maybe most people won't understand. Because for example, there was a point where I was going to write a book, and it didn't pan out, but it was going to be set in New York City after like these massive blackouts.
I remember that pitch. That was cool.
Yeah, it just didn't work out. My editor didn't like it, but it was okay. Like it didn't really work. I understood why it didn't work. But like, I sat down and kind of like, I was thinking like if I was working in the newsroom and there was a massive blackout, who am I going to call? I'm going to call Office of Emergency Management. I'm going to call Con Ed. So I called their media departments. It was like, hey, I'm writing a book. Like, I want to talk to an expert. Who can you put me in contact with? And they did. And like, just even knowing that I could make that phone call and make that request, is sort of like a superpower as a writer. And like knowing how to interview somebody, like knowing to like do as much research as you can. So you're going in to ask the questions that'll fill in all those gaps. And
exactly. Yeah. And I think that's a really like a kind of a breakthrough moment as a young journalist when you realize I can go up to a stranger and talk to them. Like I now have that power.
Yeah. Yeah. And also just in the sense of like the absolute best thing I ever learned was I remember I was covering a fire and it was like 11 o'clock at night and it was raining and it was just this really and like at a fire you go to the battalion chief to kind of find out like what alarm was it, how many people were injured, yada yada yada. And he was like, I can tell you're a new reporter because you're right, it's raining and you're using a pen instead of a pencil. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. I'm like, what else can you teach me? He's like, the best question, he's like, when we're done talking, ask me if there's anything else I could give you that you didn't ask about. And I think that is like the threat level journalism question is like when you get to the end of the interview, just be like, did this bring up anything that I didn't ask about that you think would be interesting to share with me?
Or what did I miss? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a great question.
All right, next up. Both authors talking about Toys in the Sandbox. What characters, be them comic, cartoon, or other media, would you love to write stories for? Ooh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I got a long list. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was a big Spider-Man reader as a kid. I love the X-Men. I mean, the Marvel characters, and I'm still kind of obsessed with Batman. I have like a really good Batman story in my back pocket that at some point I would love to tell. I love Star Trek. I have some cool Star Trek ideas if that ever lines up. And I think the cool thing about how we write is that even if those things don't happen, like we create stuff that fills that space in our heads. Like, at least for me, like that's how my head works sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a Superman story in my back pocket that I'm dying to do. I would love to do like a John Wick novel. I feel like
Oh,
that
really?
whole
Are those
that,
rights
that
not like
well,
somebody's got to?
they're doing a show based on the Continental, the hotel,
Okay.
but I feel like there's got to be something in that space I can do. But for some reason, I keep on saying like I want to do it as like a YA, which is like horrifying and shouldn't do. I would love to do Star Wars, like I did a Star Wars short story. Like you got to do a
Yeah.
full novel, which is super
That
cool.
was fun.
Yeah, but and this is the weird one is that I would kill to write a Detective Pikachu novel.
Really?
I saw, I watched Detective Pikachu with my daughter, and it was like this is just really fun and goofy. And there's something like it's like kind of noir because it's basically it's literally a detective story where like Pikachu doesn't have any knowledge, but like of like his partner's death and is trying to solve the death, and like it's actually like a pretty good movie. Like if you haven't watched it with your kids yet, you should. It's like it took me a little while to get Abby on board with it, but when she finally sat down and watched it, like she was enthralled, and so was I. I'm just sitting there like, oh my god, like I would do this.
Yeah, I'd also like. I was a huge Buffy fan when the show was on, so that's a world that I'm pretty familiar with. So it would be fun to play in that space.
Yeah, that would be a good one too. That's also like that's the fun, man. Like with IP, like you get to, it's that push and pull. It's like with IP, you get to go and play with someone else's toys. It's just that sometimes the other toys are so much cooler. But then it's really like enriching and nourishing to like play with your own, like build your own toys and just make them out of nothing.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the fun thing about work for hire or IP is that you don't have to tell the origin story every time. You don't have to deal with the origin because it's established. These characters exist and kind of live and breathe in their universe, and you're popping in and putting your spin on it. And the trick is just don't break the toys, and somebody else will play with them after you. And also don't feel any ownership. Like if somebody else does a Poe novel, like which is very likely, like that's fine. Like it's cool. Like it's just somebody else adding to the tapestry, I guess.
Yeah. So if someone asked for a book not written by you that represented you, what would you choose?
Oh,
that's a tough one.
That is a tough one.
Oh,
I'm just looking at my shelf.
That represents me.
I mean, the book that made me start wanting to write the PI series, the Pete books, was A Firing Offense by George Pelecanos, because it was like a young screw up character in a very clear place, like DC, in a way that I'd never read a DC book before. It felt written like from a native's perspective, like someone that really knew the dark corners of the city. And he was a screw up, and he was like drinking too much and smoking too much, and like still stumbled into like the mystery. And that was really resonated with me. But I'd probably give somebody Miami Purity, which is Vicki Hendrix's Miami noir novel. That's kind of a riff on The Postman Always Rings Twice. And it's just like one of my favorite crime novels, and it's also one of my favorite Miami crime novels. And those I felt like they were in short supply when I was just reading. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm struggling with this one because I feel like if it's a book that represents me, it's just like I got to give you one of mine because like
because you wrote them.
Yeah, I mean I guess like if we're digging deep, like Fahrenheit 451 like really resonated with me in a really big way, and was one of the books that certainly set me on the path to being a writer in a lot of ways. So yeah, I'm gonna go with Fahrenheit 451.
I will give a shout to The Godfather, which I read at a way too young age, like around 8 or 9 years old.
Holy Jesus!
And yeah, that was. Have you read the book? Because the book is so different from the movie. It's like
I have neither read the book nor seen the movie.
Oh, okay. Well,
Which
thanks for coming, everybody. Good night.
see, here's the thing, though. It's everyone's reactions when I say, and I get it as a crime writer.
You have not
like
watched any of the Godfather movies.
I have not. But now, because of people's like strong, viscerally negative reactions, I'm just like, you know what? Now I'm never gonna watch it. I'm just
Yeah,
not
now you're
gonna
just going
go.
to lead into it. Yeah.
I will say, Todd Robinson, author of The Hard Bounce, good friend, great guy.
Mhm.
He texted me like a month ago and was like, because The Godfather was playing at one of like the local theaters here in New York, and he
Oh,
was like,
nice.
he's like, we have to do this, and I'm like, I have my daughter that night. And he's like, bring her, and I'm like, no, she's 7. So
I mean, you could have turned
then
her into
again,
a crime writer.
yeah, I mean, you got your start there early. See, for me, I was reading Dean Koontz novels when I was way too young for them, at my mom's like suggestion, which was weird.
I remember reading Watchers like way too early. Like that
Yeah.
that book was messed up. But anyway, The
Yeah.
Godfather like is a really down and dirty pulp novel. Like it's got a lot of sex and violence, but it also showed me the power of the twists. Like, I mean, I don't even know what to say now because usually everyone's seen The Godfather, and so I would literally be spoiling it. But there's a moment when a character dies, a notable character that you think is the protagonist dies, and I remember just sitting up in bed and thinking like, oh, you can do that. You can like just pull the rug out from a reader and own it, and then I was just hooked. So
I don't want to take joy in being a contrarian, but like there's just something really funny about like at this point it's just so funny that it's like I'm just gonna keep with it. All
yeah.
right, what advice, if any, would both of you give yourselves at the beginning of your writing career, and what advice would you give aspiring writers? Okay, so what do you think?
What would I give myself? I would probably tell myself to keep going and not, celebrate the victories, but also celebrate the victories as much as you would kind of wallow in the defeats, because there's a lot of rejection in publishing, especially early on. Like, find that plateau and keep cruising, because that's what really helped me. But in terms of advice for new writers, I would say don't ceremonialize the process. Like, find the path that gets you to the writing as easily and as quickly as possible. Like, I know a lot of writers who have to be in a certain like headspace, or have to have a certain kind of music playing, or a certain kind of donut, I don't know, whatever, like all these little things that have to happen before you get to writing. And for me, it's like I crack open my laptop and the document is there, and I think you're the same. We just dive in. Like there can't be a lot of pomp and circumstance to it.
Yeah, and part of that is because we're both dads, so
Right.
like there's a degree to which like, your writing time is incredibly precious. And sometimes you just like it's hard to find. You're kind of fighting for it.
Yeah, it's a series of sprints that you kind of stitch together into a book.
Yeah. But that's something that I learned pretty early on, is that like I needed to have a process, and if I wasn't meeting all the parameters of that process, I couldn't write. And all I
Right.
found was that I didn't get any writing done. So it was like, this is a giant waste of time. And when I kind of realized like, oh wait, the work gets done or it doesn't get done, and I
Right.
just like it when it gets done, then it was like, oh,
you can always fix it. You can always revise it. You can tweak it.
Yeah.
And that to me is the fun part, when you have a whole novel and you're just kind of performing surgery or adding paint and tweaking it. Like that's the cool part. Like the writing is hard,
Yeah.
but you just need to like kind of power through it.
Yeah. No, that's all fantastic advice. The thing I would say is like just to kind of like practice like patience too. Amy Hempel told me this. Like she's like the greatest short story writer who ever lived. And I love her to death. And she told me the biggest mistake that young writers make is wanting to publish more than wanting to write well. And
Yeah.
I think that's such fantastic advice, and kind of like underscores why there's a vanity publishing industry in the first place. But like, we especially at the beginning of your career, you're so hungry that you're almost desperate. You'll kind of like, you'll take bad contracts, you'll take bad deals, you'll self-publish. Not to say self-publishing is always wrong. Like it certainly, can be a path
If you do
forward.
it well, if you do it like thoughtfully, yeah.
Yeah. But there's this rush to get something out, when really the time and the energy needs to be on like honing your craft and like really sort of setting yourself up for success. And so yeah, and I think like what you said too about process is so great, because I think like it's also, I see a lot of writers who kind of they get so worked up in this idea that like all writing advice is gospel, and it's like actually a lot of writing advice is like kind of shitty. you know,
I mean,
like
look at the advice. Look at who's giving the advice. Like, I'll read the advice from someone who's like done the job. Like, On Writing is a great book because Stephen King wrote it, and Stephen King has
yeah.
written very successfully for a long time. So
But
it's
but
you know,
but
like,
even then, Stephen King is like, don't use adverbs, and it's like, you know what? Sometimes I'm gonna, and it's
yeah,
okay. I can
yeah.
still
You
be a
just,
writer and use them,
it's
you
all
know.
flexible. Like, and also there's this idea like that that idea that you have to write 1,000 words a day to be a writer, and that to me, I think we were both at the same Virginia Festival of the Book where Attica Locke basically said you don't need that rule because it keeps you out, keeps people out. Like, if you think
Yeah,
you're a writer, and you know if you're like BSing yourself. Like, if you're not doing the work, you will know. You don't need 1,000 word count quota to legitimize yourself.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
So
like, so today I worked on the pitch for my new book and like sent it over to Josh, and he's going to send it over to my editor. And so I worked on that today. But like in terms of like writing prose, like actually sitting down and writing prose, I literally could not tell you when the last time I did that was.
yeah, and
And
that's okay.
this is my full-time job. It's
Yeah,
dumb, you know.
there's a
And
lot of
part of
other
that is
parts. Yeah,
yeah, and part of that is the privilege of like, you know, being a full-time writer, being in the middle of a book release, so things are kind of moving and like having like but like there's so many things in the pitch stage right now, and it's like
hmm
it's all fine, but it's like this idea of you have to write every day to be a writer. It's like, well, that's not my experience.
yeah, yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I feel like we're running up on time here. So before we close this out, what are you reading right now? What do you want to recommend?
I just finished Jennifer Hillier's new one, Things We Do in the Dark, which is a great thriller.
Ooh,
And I'm halfway through Marcy Rendon's new one, Sinister Graves. And I also want to give a shout to Eli Craner's Don't Know Tough, which I thought was really good.
nice. Yeah, I really want to pick up Eli's book. I have it. He sent it to me. I just haven't gotten it to it yet.
Oh,
I've
and
actually been
Amina Akhtar's Kismet is coming out in September, and it is fantastic.
Yeah, I really, really want to read that. I feel bad. A lot of my reading lately has been like homework reading. It's like, you know,
Yeah,
reading for blurbs for books that aren't coming for a while, or like a lot of edit. I've been doing a lot of editorial work lately.
yeah.
But All Her Little Secrets by Wanda Morris was like the last book
Oh,
I
that's
read
so
that just
good.
like completely it was incredible. I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God. And apparently she's going to be at Left Coast Crime. Like I'm really excited to like meet her and say hi.
Oh, nice.
And then this weekend I'm going to the Catskills for kind of like a post book release wind down. And I think I'm going to take Child Zero by Chris Home. He sent me that a
I
while
like
ago,
that.
and
Yeah, that one was good.
yeah, and Chris is a great dude, and I'm really excited to read that. So I think that's going to be a good sort of like, you know, get out of my head, just enjoy a non-research, non-blurb, non-editorial book.
You know which one I think you'd like? I think you'd like Devil House, the John Darnielle book.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, it's about a true crime writer who moves to a town to kind of research his next book, and it's, I mean, that's the high concept, but it's a
yeah.
kind of like a thesis on horror and fear, and it's intense. It's like, it's not light reading, but it's also so
Okay,
well crafted. Yeah,
cool, cool. I just wrote it down.
yeah,
All right.
awesome. This was great.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's all she wrote. So
Yeah,
what do we do now? Do we just?
I think the Monsieur. Yeah, I think
There we
here we are.
go.
I jump in. Sorry, I was
Yes,
also
no worries.
helping with writing down all those wonderful suggestions you had in the comment section.
Yeah,
We
thanks.
threw out a lot of books.
I know, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, yes, great!" But also, my fingers. Oh my gosh, that's, I can't believe the hour went up already, because I was like,
That was fast. Yeah.
that I was gonna say that seems too fast, but you two, yeah, you two have just wonderful things to say. I'm so glad that you, Alex, and you, Rob, were able to come here virtually, albeit. I wish you both were in store.
Someday, yeah.
Someday,
Yeah.
yes, please. Because that was wonderful. And thank you, everyone who tuned in tonight. Again, if you haven't yet already, you can get your copies of Secret Identity or Rob's The Paradox Hotel, or any of the books that they mentioned, because again, your purchases, you know, help us do what we do, be it wonderful events like this or just keep the doors open. And don't forget, both Rob and Alex have submitted signed book plates, so you'll get those for any of the purchases of their books. If you missed this event and you're seeing this in the future, still tune in, because we might still have signed book plates. But otherwise, gentlemen, where can people find you on social media?
My website is alexsegura.com. On Twitter, it's at @Alex_Segura. And I have a Facebook author page and Alex Segura Jr. on Instagram.
I am at robwhart.com, and then on Twitter at robwhart, and then on Instagram at robwhart1.
You are the one.
Well, no, so someone got there before me was the problem.
Yeah, I really want to get rid of that
I
underscore on Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah, or else I made like a Rob W. Hart account like way back and then forgot the password. I don't know.
That can happen. I'm
We've all
pretty
been
sure,
there.
especially these days.
Mhm.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to let you go. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope to see you all for our next virtual event. Night, Rob. Night, Alex.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.